Hello everybody. Welcome to another session of Stay Connected with Your Health and the Senior Center. I'm the guest host today, Michael Hirsch from the Department of Public Health, Medical Director. And I'm back to talk to us a little bit about the month of March, which is upon us pretty quickly because February is such a short month. A lot going on in March, and there's a lot going on in public health in the world, which I will try to talk to you a little bit more about. But I wanted to answer some questions that came in since the last broadcast that we did. I had a bandage on my cheek because of a bad fall that I took. It's in the process of healing. It's going to take a little bit of time, I think, to heal, but it's definitely looking better. It's not draining anything anymore, so that part of my medical problems are gone. But here's the background story, okay? And I want to get it off my chest before we launch into any of the other topics that I wanted to cover. I was blessed to have a wonderful daughter that decided to go to medical school. And she got into several places, but she ended up going to UMass, where I have been a teacher for a long time. And she met a wonderful mate there, and the two of them got married, and they both did their training out in Pittsburgh. They're going to be finished with their training this coming June. It's very exciting. And this month, March, is when Match Day is. Match Day is when all the medical students that are in the fourth year, they make a list of their favorite programs that they interviewed at, and the programs make a list of all the favorite people that they interviewed, and the computers match them up. And that's what happened to my daughter and son-in-law. They matched up in Pittsburgh, which is kind of where my daughter grew up, and she had a lot of affinity for it, and it's actually a wonderful psychiatric program, which she did her residency in, and now she's doing a pediatric psychiatry fellowship. Why am I telling you this? Because try as I may, I could not reassure my daughter that I just lost my balance and that's why I fell and got that boo-boo on my chin. I mentioned boo-boo on my chin because that's what my granddaughter, my daughter's daughter, constantly says when we do FaceTime. Opa, which is the German word for grandpa, Opa has a boo-boo. I've been hearing that every day since January 15th when I fell. Anyway, she was convinced it was not just losing my balance. She thought it was something cardiac. Don't ask me why. I guess I have been slowing down a little bit in terms of my, tolerance for activity. I don't do the long walks that I used to. I ascribe that to losing my dog. I lost my dog last May, and I used to walk him all the time. And once he died, I didn't walk him because it made me sad to walk. Anyway, because of her insistence, I got a cardiac workup. And on January 30th, I had a cardiac catheterization. And they found that I had a 90% occlusion of one of the three main coronary arteries. And that, fortunately, they were able to put 3 stents in the artery to widen it again. And they were very happy with the results. Because I'm diabetic, I don't get chest pain like many people that have cardiac disease do. When they blew up the balloon to start dilating that blood vessel so they could put the stents in, they warned me, Mike, you might be feeling some chest pain now. They blew it up, that totally occluded that artery, so now it was 100% occluded. I didn't have any chest pain at all. So my problem now is I have to recognize that if I do get very short of breath or if I do get very sweaty, that might be me having a cardiac event. But they're reassuring me now that I am good as new, better than new. And what I'm saying to you, because I know so much of this audience is older like me, so there's a certain lag between how you physically are. Okay, your vessels are open and the stents are working and all of that stuff. But in your brain, there's a part of you that feels a little vulnerable now. Maybe a little bit not so confident that your health is great. Everyone tells me I'm lucky. I was lucky. I didn't have any heart damage. But in my mind, I feel like I dodged a big bullet, and I kept thinking about the fact that I have these two wonderful granddaughters, and my daughter, the one who insisted on this workup and probably saved me, has another little daughter on her way in May. So I want to be around for those folk. Those three little girls, I want to be here as long as I can. Within reason. Look, I don't want to be demented and walking around not even knowing that they're there and them not understanding what I'm saying. But I know that, in the Worcester Senior Center, you all have similar experiences. You have families that depend on you. You're the elder statesman. You're the place where wisdom comes from all your experiences and from all your knowledge. I just want to be around. Maybe that's asking too much, I don't know. But it's a humbling experience. So I went from just having a little Band-Aid on my chin to having this huge deal, and I'm lucky to be here. 1 month later, I'm walking around, I'm, feeling pretty good. I just started cardiac rehab, which if any of you have one of these cardiac issues, I urge you to seek that out. And I know that they do some cardiac kind of rehab at the Worcester Senior Center, but this is a very special kind of physical therapy because they have you hooked up to a monitor the whole time. So they can see what your heart's doing, what your blood pressure's doing, what your blood sugar is doing in my case. And it makes you more confident that when you do these certain exercises in the cardiac rehab place that you can then do them outside. Because I haven't really been comfortable or confident about doing walks, especially when it's been a very, very cold February and going into March. So anyway, that's my tale I wanted to tell you about at the start because people were asking about my boo-boo. So my boo-boo is better outside and inside. Now I got to get my mind into the idea that I'm going to live till I'm 100. I don't think that's asking for too much, but we'll see. Anyway, March. March comes in like a lion, goes out like a lamb. And we know from the information we got from Punxsutawney Phil, he thought we were going to have a pretty brutal March. And if February was any example, it's going to be snowy and icy and windy, and it's cold. And I urge all of you that do have cardiac issues, cold is not the best thing for you, nor is shoveling. So I think you got to figure out ways of having people help you with that shoveling. If you have to shovel your sidewalks, I know that's a requirement if you own a home, but there are people out there willing to do it. It's money well spent. Many, many heart attacks generated by shoveling. What else can we say about March? It's named after the god of war, Mars. So it's not a very peaceful legacy. And it used to be one of the first months of the year, but then when the Gregorian calendar took over for the Julian calendar, they inserted January and February in front of March, and that's kind of how we got our order of months. The daffodil is the month's flower because towards the end of March, when it starts to get a little bit more spring-like. March 21st is the vernal equinox. That's when spring officially starts. So the daffodils will be one of the first appearing flowers. And the stone is aquamarine, beautiful colored stone, quartz-like stone, clear. And in general, March has been a month that has become representative of a lot of different interest groups. As far as health goes, it's multiple sclerosis recognition month. It's also kidney health month. It has a proud tradition of being Irish American Heritage Month. You all know that March 17th is St. Patrick's Day, and that's a day that's near and dear to my heart. Always was, because I grew up in an Irish neighborhood in New York, but in 2022, City Manager Augustus and I were the co-grand marshals of the St. Patrick's Day Parade, which was the first one that was held post-pandemic after a 2-year hiatus. And what a thrill that was, Should have brought my shillelagh. I still have it at home. Beautiful shillelagh that the Grand Marshals get to walk with. And the first Monday of March is Count Pulaski Day. Many of you Polish Americans know about Kazimierz Pulaski. He was a brilliant cavalry soldier who came from Poland to help General Washington organize American cavalry forces in the Revolutionary War. Unfortunately, he was killed in action towards the end of the war. But his contributions to several of the Continental Army victories were very, very well documented. So, Count Pulaski, we salute you, and all the Polish Americans who have contributed so much to our society. We also want to recognize that the disease that I mentioned, multiple sclerosis, this is Multiple Sclerosis Recognition Month, is a very devastating disease, seems to strike middle-aged women more than any other population, but it is on the rise statistically. It can be controlled with medication, but as of now, there's really not a total cure out there. But the earlier you recognize it and get it treated, you can delay its progression. When it progresses, it can cause inability to be mobile and be dependent on a wheelchair. But there's a lot of hope on the horizon that a genetic solution might be available. So on that note, I should point out UMass, our local medical school, has had an amazing track record of gene therapy. There are certain previously incurable diseases that they've been able to do some of the mitigation of these terrible diseases using gene therapy, particularly cystic fibrosis. But there's a very rare disease called Canavan's disease, C-A-N-A-V-A-N'(S), that is a very rare genetic disease. But when you're one of the parents of one of these children that has it, it's devastating. It's almost always fatal eventually. Maybe a patient will have, they'll present in the newborn period and they'll have a 4 or 5 year run. And we have successfully at UMass seen at least one little girl named Noah who's been treated with a gene therapy modality and has had a remarkable improvement. There's a particular enzyme that is lacking in patients with Canavan disease, And they have figured out a way of implanting a gene that makes that enzyme so that the toxic chemicals that not having the enzyme causes the buildup, that those go away. And that's what does the damage to the brain that patients that suffer Canavan's disease will die from. So there's some amazing stuff going on in medicine. It is really, really overwhelming sometimes, the progress that's being made in cancer therapy. There's immune therapy now for so many people that have widespread disease that this immune therapy can keep at bay for years, not just days or weeks, years of remission because of this new therapy. So we're very much cutting edge. You know, we just had a donor, Mr. Demers Foundation, give a $35 million donation to the medical school. And this is very important because the next part of this rant that I'm on with you is going to be about the state of medicine and the state of public health now that the Senate has ratified the position of Health and Human Services Secretary to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So I'm not going to mention his name again. I know you all know he's a person who has spent over 20 years trying to sow the seeds of vaccine hesitance. He's accused people of manufacturing vaccine to protect certain ethnic groups in the country. He's accused people of getting autism because they've got vaccinated. And what's the result? The amount of hesitancy in the country and in the world has risen to the point where we're starting to see outbreaks of diseases that we thought we had licked completely. Polio. Now, I know I've talked to you about polio before. In 1954, Jonas Salk came out with a vaccine in Pittsburgh that was done by injection. 2 years later, Dr. Sabin came out with an oral form of that vaccine. And both times when it was announced that this vaccine was available, mothers brought their children in, and lineups around the block or down the street was a common thing. And people would wait 2, 4, 6 hours to get these vaccinations. Because prior to that, every summer, you'd start out with a cold in your child, and then the fear would set in, oh my God, could this be polio? And unfortunately, before the vaccination was available, it struck thousands and thousands of kids, including our president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and our former Republican Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, which is why he was one of the only people to vote against the confirmation of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., because his life was saved by having the vaccine. So, we've seen polio outbreaks, measles outbreaks. Measles was a disease that pretty much had been forgotten about. You have to show the medical students pictures from the 50s and 60s of kids with measles because they're just not around anymore. Now we have measles outbreaks. Measles is one of the most contagious infectious diseases in the world, maybe number one. For example, they have a scoring system. The virology experts have a scoring system for how contagious a disease is. So let's just use COVID as an example. If you're exposed to a COVID person, a person carrying COVID, in an hour, on average, they could infect 3 people. That's kind of the approximation of how contagious COVID is. Measles, the number is 18. So it's 6 times more contagious than COVID. And because it lingers in the air for 2 hours after the measles positive patient leaves. It wipes out that room if a doctor has been looking at the patient for 2 hours, because if you walk into that room even an hour later after the patient's gone, you'll get measles. Very, very bad disease to have flourishing again. So maybe some of you will remember and had measles. I had measles, there were red spots on me. They were very itchy. Sometimes little kids would not know what they were doing and they'd scratch them and they'd get a little infection, but no big deal. A few days of a rash and a fever and you don't feel like eating and you're nauseous. No, the problem is that a sizable proportion of people with measles will not just get the rash, they'll get what's called encephalitis, where the lining of the skull around the brain gets inflamed. And this can cause irreparable brain damage and even death. So that kind of complication is what we were so happy for a measles vaccine for. It wasn't for the rash part. It was really, you were preventing dying patients from measles. And seeing measles come back, seeing polio come back, and this year we've had more cases in Massachusetts of whooping cough, pertussis, which is also part of a complex of vaccinations that children get, than we've ever had in the last 15 years. So, what's happening is, it's not like the vaccination rate is going from 98%, which it had been for years, up in the very high 90s, down to 60% or 50%. No, it's not that drastic. It's just reducing the vaccination percentage down to like 93% will cause these outbreaks. So we've got to fight any federal policy that makes vaccinations optional. Now, we used to have a pretty liberal way of, you get a doctor's note and you could get an exemption from getting vaccinated. Or you get a clergyman's note that say for religious reasons you can't get vaccinated. All of that stopped during COVID because, yes, it's very important to take care of your individual health, but your individual health choices cannot override the public health. And if you're walking around with a very communicable disease because you didn't vaccinate, you're going to affect others that will potentially die because of your unwillingness to comply with a vaccine mandate. These aren't sexy words, mandate and compulsory and all this stuff. This is what public health is about, the greatest good for the greatest number. And vaccinations have stood the test of time since the days of Louis Pasteur. In the 1860s, when he developed vaccine against tuberculosis and smallpox, these are things that, we can't march backwards into history to give people their individual freedom. And our Health and Human Services Department should not start rolling back these mandates. Now, I don't think that Massachusetts is going to kowtow to federal information about this. We have a wonderful Mass Department of Public Health led by Robbie Goldstein. Our governor, who's a former attorney general, is very aware of the health risks that would come from stopping vaccination. And I think that what we have to look at is ways of getting rid of the hesitancy, getting disinformation about vaccination negated. We can't have all these people out there saying, well, it could cause health effects that nobody knows about. this is not documented with research at all. My kid could get Asperger's syndrome or, no, that's been refuted. The paper that started that hubbub about vaccinations causing all different kind of neurological conditions in kids was totally debunked. It's been withdrawn, and the author of it has been essentially sent to Siberia. I mean, the person has got no medical credibility anymore. Yet this is what RFK Jr. has been propagating. He's also, as you know, a big proponent of less processing of our foods. He likes raw milk, he likes raw cheese, he likes uncured meat. This is why our number one concern now, health-wise, besides the outbreaks that I mentioned of polio and measles, is the bird flu. So let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the bird flu. The bird flu's been around for a while, and we started seeing outbreaks of it within like waterfowl and wild birds in the early 1990s already. So it's been around for a while. But what's different is that the bird flu is probably being made worse by the fact that birds or products made out of birds are being fed to livestock. And the cows, whether they're dairy cows or they're meat cows for, steaks, are eating this, and then they have it in their system. Now, not all the cows get that sick. The birds die of bird flu, but the cows get sick, but they make milk that, if it's not pasteurized, can transmit the bird flu. So the only cases in California that have been seen in humans are people that work in these livestock areas that have been drinking raw milk. So that's how we know it's beginning to spread. There have been only 70 cases in humans so far, and none of them have been fatal except one down in Louisiana, a person that had a lot of medical comorbidities, other medical problems. But it's significant enough now that the Mass Department of Public Health has specific instructions that providers in their offices and emergency medical facilities and urgent care facilities all now must be up to date on. So what does that mean? If you come into one of those facilities or your doctor's office with respiratory issues, there's a bank of tests that they will do kind of rapidly. They do a COVID test, they do an influenza A and an influenza B. It's now all from the same swab that you probably remember having to do when you had the COVID crisis going on. And influenza A is very, very busy this year. Many more cases than we've seen in a while. Not really sure why that is. It seems as if the flu vaccine this year didn't hit the right combination of deterrents, so that influenza A is really quite hefty and causing a lot of visits to the emergency room. But if that panel is negative and the patient has had exposure either to dead birds, like they were out on a pond and saw a bunch of dead ducks or dead swans or dead raptors, like the falcons and ospreys, then the further recommendation is that they undergo a special bird flu test, which gets sent to a central lab in the Mass Department of Public Health. You won't get the answer right away, but if a person has it, then there's going to be a whole forensic thing about who they were with, and we have to do the contact tracing like we did with COVID. So far, nobody in Massachusetts has contracted this. So the public information says the risk with avian flu for humans is low. There's been no evidence of a human-to-human transmission. What they've seen is livestock to human and bird to livestock. Cats can get it. Dogs seem to not get it. So if your cat happened to be out and about and found a dead bird and ate it, they might get bird flu. And it can be a severe infection in cats and deadly. So we just have to all be much more vigilant. And this is a time of vigilance. This is not a time for ignoring this. And one of the things that's frustrating is there is actually a vaccine out there for the bird flu, but it's not being rapidly produced in any volume. So what we learned from the COVID crisis was that when the pandemic was declared on March 11th, 2020, to the time that we got vaccine was January of 2021. That's a very fast pace. And we lost a lot of people in that first year because we didn't have antiviral drugs until September. We didn't have monoclonal antibodies till October. And then we had the vaccine starting late December, early January. So without any of those tools, a lot of people between March and August passed away. That's when we had our biggest problem with death. But having that vaccine mass produced would not be a bad idea. I don't know if we're going to have human-to-human transmission, but we shouldn't have to have the 8-month lag time that we did. Even though I think that was very rapid, it should be very short term before we have a vaccine available. And people will be lining up. I guarantee you, if bird flu starts to hit humans, it'll be like the polio epidemic. Everybody will want this. I just hope that the information we get out of Washington is not so discouraging about getting vaccinated for anything that we all kind of throw up our hands and say, let's just get it over with. Now, they just had a incident this past weekend. They released a study that was done on veterinarians to see whether, because they took care of birds and they took care of livestock, et cetera, did they have evidence of having had the bird flu? And they only found 3 veterinarians in the Georgia, South Carolina area that had antibodies to the bird flu that said that they had it. They had it, but it was so mild, they didn't even think they were sick enough to get tested or anything. The interesting thing about those 3 veterinarians is all 3 of them denied having worked with birds. They only worked with cats and dogs. So maybe it was an infected cat that got them. It shows that the current iteration of bird flu is not that serious. I mean, it causes flu-like symptoms, but it may be so mild that you don't even notice it, like these veterinarians didn't. But if the bird flu figures out how to transmit between birds and humans or humans and humans, it's also smart enough to mutate to be more severe. So we are in a difficult position in the Department of Public Health because I don't think we're going to get a lot of support from the federal government. Federal government has slashed the support to the NIH so that many of the thousands of doctors around the country that have NIH grants now are in terrible straits because the overhead costs for running a lab are very high, and that's what the NIH has taken away. So your grant is kind of much less effective at supporting you. And there are going to be doctors that are laid off. There are going to be lab assistants that are laid off. There are going to be people that maintain the labs at night when the doctors want to go to sleep that are going to be laid off. The CDC, which is our best ally in giving good medical information, had a gag order issued to it for the first time since 1952. The Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, MMWR, was halted at the end of January. It resumed publication in February of this past year, but it didn't include any information about bird flu. And they've scrubbed a lot of the websites that the CDC has about various diseases. Unfortunately, diseases that are real menaces that for some reason didn't fit into whatever construct that Washington, D.C. has in mind. So less information about HIV, less information about Ebola, less information about monkeypox. You can't play politics and you can't play cultural wars with disease. You have to give the information. And we as public health officials need it at the Worcester Department of Public Health. And you, the public, deserve to have it if you want to look things up. The CDC was a go-to place. They're also getting rid of a lot of their firearm and injury prevention sections within the CDC. So lots of people laid off, pretty much indiscriminately. This is a rough time. So what am I saying? We can't, as an individual, do anything about this, so why run around with your hair on fire? I'm not saying run around with your hair on fire. I'm just saying that there are going to be opportunities for us as a people, as a country, to stand up and say, this is not what we wanted. I understand why the present administration is in office, but I don't think that these individual topics like we're talking about in public health and virology were things that people really signed up for. If they had really been asked, hey, do you want to stop all vaccinations? I think that would have been a very small percentage of the people that actually voted Donald Trump into office. So I would just have you keep your ears and eyes open for the next set of political campaigns that are out there. Some of them will be state elections, some of them will be congressional elections in 2 years, the quote-unquote midterms, and maybe we can right the ship. And in the meantime, I promise you, the Mass Department of Public Health, the Worcester Department of Public Health, will try to lend its voice to push against any disinformation that's coming out that suggests that vaccinations are unsafe or that vaccinations are not necessary. That's just not how we have rolled. We wouldn't have gotten through the pandemic without a strong belief in the power of vaccine. And I told you before, Worcester lost 600 people during the pandemic, but I think it could have been a lot more had we not had such a strong vaccination policy. So March is going to roar in like a lion. I hope it'll go out like a lamb. I hope we will find that maybe some of the dire things I described are overblown. You know, it sounded like during the confirmation hearings, RFK Jr. was walking back a lot of his most extreme positions and maybe surrounded by scientists, hopefully that he doesn't fire, he'll awaken to the notion that the greatest good for the greatest number includes a vaccination policy that's strong, discouraging people from drinking raw milk, and having a little bit more awareness that if this bird flu continues to evolve, we'll be facing another pandemic and we got to be ready. So with that, for those of you Polish Americans that are listening, happy Kazimierz Pulaski Day. For those Irish Americans, I want to say thanks and for all your contributions to our country and to our city, and I hope you have a happy St. Patrick's Day. You know, that's what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about St. Patrick's Day before I leave. St. Patrick's Day is also called Evacuation Day. Evacuation Day because that's the day that the British in 1775 evacuated Boston. And that's an incredible story. I may have told it to you before, but it's one of my favorite stories. There was a general who was the right-hand man of General Washington named Henry Knox. He was an armament specialist. He knew all about howitzers and cannons and different kind of rifles. And in the latter part of 1774, his ally, General Benedict Arnold, and also the Green Mountain Boys of Ethan Allen from Vermont, attacked Fort Ticonderoga, which controlled the whole Hudson Valley. And amongst the things they captured was some wonderful artillery pieces. So Henry Knox suggested to Washington that he could bring those cannon from the Lake George area in New York State all the way to Boston to see if placing them strategically, they could maybe force the British to consider leaving the city. This was an amazing trek, and there are actual landmarks all through Massachusetts of where this trek went through. They were dragging these cannon using oxen and horses and manpower over mountains and under waterfalls, and it just was an unbelievable task. But sure enough, they got those cannon and installed them on the apex of Dorchester Heights that commanded the whole Boston harbor. And just by having those cannon stationed there, the British evacuated on St. Patrick's Day, 1775. And if Boston really had stayed in British hands, along with New York, which later fell to the Brits, the whole Northeast corridor would have been, bollocksed up with, domination by the Redcoats. So having Boston free and having a way of getting goods into Boston Harbor was a very important victory. So 2 reasons to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, right? Not just green beer and thinking about getting the snakes out of Ireland, but also having the British get the heck out of Boston. 30,000 Bostonians who were sympathetic to the king, they're called Tories, left Boston and traveled their way to Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is why if you visit Halifax, and I definitely suggest you do if you get a chance, it's a beautiful town, looks just like Boston, because all the Bostonians built the harbor very much like the harbor and the downtown of Boston. A lot of streets that look very much like Beacon Hill and Charles Street, etc. Anyway, so that's my little history lesson for today. Thank you all for your concern about my boo-boo, and hopefully I'll be a new man by the time we meet again in April. So I wish you all well, and thanks for watching another edition of Stay Connected with the Worcester Senior Center. Mike Hirsch signing out.